Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Whatever the time of day may be where you are, we wish you a warm welcome as we embark upon the next hour together as part of our webinar series on communicating across cultures. My name is Angela Cunningham, and I am Director of Products at Toastmasters International. And as you take your seats and settle in and get comfortable, I'll share just a few words on housekeeping. Please note that whilst you can see us, we cannot see you, but we still do want to hear from you. We ask that if you have questions for our distinguished panel, simply submit them through the Q&A feature on your screen. We have set aside 15 minutes at the end where we'll get through as many of your questions as we can. This webinar is being recorded, and access to this will be sent to the email that you registered with. The chat feature is open, and so you can chat with each other during the webinar if you so wish. Please be sure to be courteous to fellow attendees. And now, let me introduce you to our moderator for today, Dilip Abhisekara. Dilip grew up in Sri Lanka and moved to the United States for his higher education. After earning a PhD in chemistry, he worked for 12 years as an industrial scientist, during which time he joined Toastmasters and discovered he had a talent for public speaking and training. He was twice a finalist in the Toastmasters World Championship of Public Speaking contest, and he has served as Toastmasters International President, the organization's highest leadership role. Along the way, he founded a speech coaching and training business that brought him in front of international audiences. He also has had a career as a college professor, teaching subjects related to communication and world religions. Encountering a call to ministry, he earned a Master of Divinity degree and now serves as a full-time pastor of a church in Pennsylvania. Thank you, Dilip, for being with us today. Over to you.
Thank you, Angela. I'm happy to be here with our international panel of experts and the thousands of listeners. I'm excited to introduce Pellegrino Riccardi. Pellegrino has spent the last 30 years traveling the globe, helping people to connect and interact more effectively with each other. His client list includes some of the largest and well-known brands and organizations in the world. Pellegrino was born in the United Kingdom in an Italian family and has lived in Norway for the past 24 years. His multicultural background, along with his first-hand cross-cultural work experience, gives him a solid basis from which to provide audiences with tips, practical tools, and thought-provoking insights into what makes people tick. As a motivational speaker to international audiences, Pellegrino combines storytelling and observational humor to provide what he calls edutainment. Using a unique mix of powerful visual and multimedia effects, Pellegrino takes his audience on an emotional journey. The second expert with us today is Sandra Coles-Bell. Sandra is a longtime member of Toastmasters International, serving in many leadership capacities within the organization, and most recently as district director. Professionally, she works for the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. as a program director of the Office of Cultural Diversity and Outreach. Sandra plans and executes ministries and events for large multicultural communities within the Archdiocese, with a primary focus on the African American, African, Caribbean, and Filipino Catholic communities. Sandra has served on the statewide ad hoc task force on racism for the Maryland Catholic Conference. She is a founding member of the ADW Steering Committee on Racism, serves as the secretary for the National Association of Black Catholic Administrators, as well as the National Black Catholic Congress Board. We are indeed very fortunate to have Pellegrino and Sandra on our panel today. So let's get to it. Let's start to learn how we can better communicate across cultures and know our audience. So we are going to have a little chat, a discussion here. And I invite the thousands watching just to eavesdrop. And as you get questions, feel free to enter them in the chat box. My first question goes to Pellegrino. Pellegrino, describe what it means, what cross-cultural communication means to you, and how your own work and career fits into the topic. And of course, I'm sure you'll drop in an anecdote or two to illustrate your point. What is cross-cultural communication? How does that work?
Briefly, but basically, it's how two or more people communicate with one another effectively when you have what I call different frames of reference. You know, you've got different worldviews of how things are, should be, and how they should be said. And I think I really started in this career, if I can call it a career, because of my background. I mean, I'm a child of immigrants. So my mother and my father, they moved to the UK in the 60s. And I grew up with parents who, if I'm honest, they didn't integrate very well at all in the UK society. They were part of the ghetto. They only hung out with other Italians, and not just other Italians, but other Southern Italians as well, a regional sense of belonging to the Naples area. So they spoke terrible English. They had pretty much zero cultural awareness, and they weren't well integrated at all. So I ended up being a kind of a bridge maker between them and the Brits. You know, I went to British schools, and I would go to England. As I went to school, I would be going to England, and then I'd come home in the evening. And as soon as I entered the door of our house, I was back in Italy. And everything in there was Italian. The only thing that was English in there was the TV. That was it. So if you switched the TV off, you were back in Italy. It smelled like Italy. It sounded like Italy. And while it sounds really romantic and nice, you know, it proved to be really challenging for my parents living and working in the UK. And I was often their translator, cultural bridge maker, bridge builder. And that's where I began to sort of create skills on understanding two different worldviews and trying to get them to meet in the middle. That's where it really started for me, I think. And that slowly developed into a career, which is what I do now. And looking back now at my childhood, you know, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was learning some really useful skills on that. I didn't know it at the time. I know it now. Yeah.
That's fascinating. And how you have used that, what you learned growing up in UK as a member of an Italian family, to build a career that connects people together. So Sandra, you are in a different situation. You are in Washington, DC. Tell us about your cross-cultural experiences in terms of understanding what it is to bridge cultures.
Oh, thank you so much for the question. And I find it incredibly fascinating that I happen to live in an area of the world in which so many cultures come in. And I've had the opportunity to work with many cultures when I was working at NIH many years ago. And I think that's where I began to understand that there, as Pellegrino has said, many worldviews. But I think the thing that I found the most fascinating is the ability to be able to be embraced by other cultures. That's what I encountered, and I still encounter that in the work that I do currently. Being able to go to their celebrations, being able to understand clothing and music, and being able to be invited into their homes over and over again. And then it blossomed into the work that I currently do. But it also deepened as well when I got to understand that culture is not just that external, but it also has to do with the internal as well. What are our values? Where did we come from? And how do we embrace those values in the current culture? So all of those things, as Pellegrino alluded to, but become very much a part of who we are. And it helps us to know the people that we have encountered and that we get to work with and for.
Wonderful. And
Can I
Sandra,
just
you,
make a point, actually? Can I just interrupt there?
yes,
Sandra, you said something really, I made a note of it, being embraced by others. I'd never thought of it that way before. That's a lovely word, to be embraced. It reminded me of a story, actually. When I was in Rio once, I had a day off and I thought I would see Rio and the sights. And somebody has said to me the most efficient way to do that is to negotiate a day price with a taxi driver and get the same taxi driver to drive you around. Okay, I did that, got in the cab. I don't speak Portuguese. He didn't speak any English. We had zero in common. How do I get the taxi driver to sort of to embrace me and show me all the nice things? Well, there's one thing that unites people around the world I've found, and it's soccer, football. So he said, he said in Portuguese, where are you from? And I understood. I said, Napoli. And he said, Maradona, who used to play for Napoli, this famous player who's Argentinian. I said, yes. And all he said was Maradona or Pelé. Pelé being a Brazilian footballer. That was the trap that he laid for me. Am I going to say Maradona or Pelé is the best in the world? And I said, Pelé. And he smiled and he embraced me with his smile. And the rest of the day, even though we couldn't communicate, was wonderful. And it was just a great example of how to sort of get people to open up. What is it you can do or say to them to connect you, even when you don't speak the same language? So I really like that word, being embraced by someone.
well, Pellegrino, you just cited one way we can bridge cultures and connect with people, find something in common, especially something that the other person may be passionate about. And that requires a certain approach to our interactions with others, isn't it? Sandra, you alluded to the fact that culture is many things. You said our heritage, our values, our beliefs, many, many things like that. And we are going to use that word culture often. Pellegrino, are there other ways to describe culture?
There are many ways. I use the one I use a lot is this idea of accepted or familiar behavior within a group of people. Accepted or familiar. What's okay to say and do, and what's been done many times before, the familiarity of it.
Got it.
And I'm very careful to use the word groups. It's not just related to countries, obviously. Mm-hmm. It's groups of people. That group of people could be a church society, it could be a sports team, a corporation. Culture has many, many levels. But within that group of people, as you defined it, it's what is accepted and familiar, and also what kinds of behaviors are rewarded amongst that group. That's really important. Groups of people will tend to do the things they will be rewarded for, rewarded being acceptance of your peers. Mm-hmm. And that can be a good thing and a bad thing, because that can also lead to peer pressure. Cultures are really powerful. They can often make people do things and say things that they may not necessarily believe, but they do them nonetheless, because that's what gets them acceptance within the group, the reward part.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to throw this to you, to Sandra. Sandra, so there are people with different expectations of their own particular group, but when you get them together, and you've been doing this as a professional, and my hat is off to you. I know sometimes it's high pressure, especially when it comes to people who are strongly identified with their own group. How do you get them to loosen up and connect with others who may have different sets of values, or they see life through different lenses? What are some of the things that you found to work to help bridge those cultural divides?
A great question, Philip. And one of the things that I have always found is to understand and respect. If I can do those two things. So by understanding is, particularly if it's a culture that I've never been in before, I'll do research. I want to really understand who they are. Just as I know myself, I also want to know that particular group and really get an understanding so that when I walk in, I understand where they are, how they feel, and then be able to then respect where they are and respect them where they are, as I also respect myself. And that's an important bridge to be able to have with people. One thing that I've come to understand about people who, and as Pellegrino said, not even being able to speak the same language or be of the same culture, but there's always a commonality. And one thing that I find incredibly soothing and bonding is a smile. A smile is the most effective thing. It lightens my face, it puts many at ease. And with that, then the doors I find begin to open. And then after that, I ask a question. I really ask the question. And the question can be as simple as, what countries are represented in this group? Where are you from? What dialects are represented? Talk to me about those. I'd love to be able to embrace hearing those. So the question is the secondary part. I start with the smile and then the question. Pellegrino, in fact, identified the same thing in his excursion in Rio. So it works. The question came to him. He didn't pose it.
Absolutely. So you're good listeners. And what you indicated was you want people to know that you are curious about them, right? And you want to know, you are interested. You're not coming as an authority, you're coming in as an interested person. So Pellegrino, in my reading, I came across this over and over again, that the traits of humility, vulnerability, and curiosity are beneficial when learning about another culture. Why is that good advice from your experience?
Well, as Sandra was saying, this idea of curiosity, we have an expression in English, curiosity killed the cat. I don't know where that came from, but it's not true at all. It doesn't kill the cat at all. It's quite the opposite. What curiosity does, when you're genuinely curious, and I just want to put that qualifier on the word curious, you have to be genuinely curious. It's really important. When you're genuinely curious about other people, what you do, you trigger something in their brain, which tells them, you see me, right? You actually acknowledge me and you see me. And it ties in with the whole idea of listening as well. I'm usually quite good, or I try to keep my opinions back a little bit at the beginning. I want to hear what they think first. And I think that's what it does to people. Asking questions about them triggers something in their mind that says, wow, you see me, you acknowledge me. Vulnerability also has a similar effect in people. Showing any form of vulnerability, again, and I've done a lot of sort of reading and research around this, it triggers something in the brain that opens people up. Vulnerability is a great tool to open people up. The kind of, a phrase I use a lot is, I'm sorry if I seem a little bit ignorant here, but could you tell me a bit more about, I read something, but I'm not sure that was true. Is it true? Could you tell me? It's that kind of humble approach, which people find irresistible. They want to tell you more about stuff. So
Yeah.
These are very useful human interaction strategies, which I found have been, they never fail basically. And again, back to, he's an easy target, and this isn't a political statement at all. But one of the big failings of Mr. Trump is that he is incapable of showing any vulnerability. And to many people, that actually doesn't attract. And again, that's not a political statement from me at all. I'm not, what he believes in is up to him. But from a human aspect, he doesn't give us any vulnerabilities whatsoever. And it makes it quite difficult to kind of attach to him. I don't know if you agree there, Sandra. In there in Washington, close to the man himself.
Don't put her on the spot.
No.
But you mentioned some things. We are today focusing on the theme of know your audience. Yeah. So now we have thousands of people listening in. many of them Toastmasters, who are in clubs that have people from many different nations. And we are told in Toastmasters, when you speak to an audience, know your audience. But what do you do when your audience has multiple cultural backgrounds, right? How do you approach them? And Sandra, in your very impressive background, we heard that you have a primary focus on African American, African, Caribbean, Filipino communities. So that's a mix. And you don't always have them as separate, but you frequently, I'm sure, have a mix. How do you communicate effectively when there's a mix of cultural backgrounds in your audience?
Well, thank you for that question. I actually know myself, and so I'm able to relate from my own perspective, which is very relational. I just love to build relationship with people. With that, understanding and respecting where they are, I think that's the biggest thing. You're right, they are in together and they are in the same room, but understanding each of them as individuals. It's wonderful when I'm able, I love maps, I love the globe. And so when somebody tells me where they're from, I can tell them, oh, you're from the western part of Africa, or the southern, or the eastern. And they go, you know, aren't you American? I go, yes, yes, but I'm a curious American. So in my office, I have a world map that's huge, but I look at it constantly because I'm meeting people from all over the world. And typically that's the bond. I'm able to say, you're from here. Ah, I know exactly where that is. And I remember being in a meeting one time and somebody talked to me about their country. And when they said the name, I did this, I made that gesture. And he said, you're right. How did you know I come from the smallest country in Africa? What an opportunity for us just to bond over that. Just that small gesture. But it's because of the fact I had a visual of it.
That's beautiful, beautiful. So we know that people from different cultural backgrounds take advice differently. Let's talk about giving feedback on performance, or showing gratitude. And we have to be, the more we are aware, obviously, the better we can frame how we present what we are saying. So let's talk about feedback, Pellegrino. When you give feedback to someone, what are some things you found to help you cross cultural divides and make it easy for them to receive what you're saying?
Well, I think the first thing with any kind of cross-cultural communication rule is to think in generalities or patterns. You know, it doesn't apply to everybody, right? It would be a mistake to say, okay, I'm talking to someone from China, therefore it always works when I give this type of feedback. But having said that, going back to my childhood, growing up in my Southern Italian tradition family and the British feedback when I was around in the UK and even today, you know, tends to be kind of loaded with this famous British understatement. Things sound really, you know, the classic, oh, that's interesting. Perhaps you'd like to take a look at, you know, perhaps you'd like to take a look at in British means take a look at. You should look at this. It tends to be quite indirect. When I was doing giving feedback to my Italian peers, because of the hierarchy in Italian society, especially when talking to older people, I had to be very careful about my feedback. I had to be very respectful, sometimes a little bit submissive in my feedback if I was to criticize or give constructive feedback. But generally speaking, around the world, the more individualist the culture, so Western societies tend to be quite individualistic. Generally speaking, the more direct you can be in your feedback. As you venture more from European terms, south into the African continent, east towards Asia, the Middle East, feedback needs to be a lot more indirect and a lot more careful, I would say, and less openly confrontational.
Yes, you brought up a good point. about cultures. Some are individualistic, as most Western are, and many are collectivist, as in China, Japan, Korea, countries of that sort. So knowing our audience really enables us to choose the words that we use. So one of the challenges that we often face is not knowing people well enough before we give them feedback, right? So I go back to what Sandra said. She said she is very relational, and you're obviously so interested in people. They understand that when you speak to them, you're coming from a point of interest and support as opposed to judgment, right? So since I'm a pastor and I coach pastors, I tell them your sermon begins before you get into that pulpit on Sunday. Your sermon began when you visited that person who was sick in hospital, and when you sent a card of congratulations to someone who just graduated, or when you made a phone call to inquire about someone who was sick. That prepares their heart to hear what you're going to say. So communication is such a deep, deep subject, but that is bolstered by what we do before, right? So Sandra, what are some of the things that you do in your relationships that you find really enable you to do the other part of your work well because you invested in that relationship? Can you share with us?
I would love to. One of the things that I always make sure of is that I context myself as well. And particularly if I'm working with a group very closely, I have to remind them, and I can think of one group that I work with. They are from Africa, and they are very much from different countries in Africa. And I constantly remind them that don't forget, I'm raised in America. I may look like you, but I was raised in America. And it becomes important for me to context how I think, how I was educated in this country. And then how do we work together? And we were at a point, and this was an interesting story, in which I was being very directed. I was giving them, I think we ought to do it this way. And they were quiet, very respectful, they were quiet. And then it took a moment, and then they said, well, you know, Sandra, where we're from, we don't do it that way. And I had this big smile on my face, and I said, oh, was that my American coming out? And they said, yes. Yes, it was. And that being vulnerable, being able to share in context,
yes,
was, and with them, and for them to feel incredibly comfortable to say, after a few moments, because the room was a little quiet, you know, that's just, and they were collected in there shaking their heads. That's just not how we do it.
I think that's a very important point you make there, Sandra. That's a really important point. It's the idea, a lot of people are afraid to make a mistake, say the wrong thing. You know, I need to do a course in cultural awareness before I even set foot in the country. I don't think that's the case at all. I think you need to be open to make the odd mistakes. I think most people realize you're not from their local culture and will gladly help you as long as you show this kind of vulnerability, curiosity, willingness to learn as well, yeah? I, for one, am never afraid to say, listen, I'm not sure how it's done here. Could you explain it to me?
right.
You know, and I shouldn't really be saying that. I'm supposed to be the expert here, but you know, I've learned so many things simply by asking, how does one do it? I mean, listen, could you give me some tips here? I do it all the time. Maybe when we get older, we get a bit more confident. I don't know. But I'm not afraid to show that vulnerability. And I've made lots of little mistakes. I think that was a great point, Sandra, you made. Yeah.
Yes, another thing that Sandra made, I don't know whether she realized what she was doing, was you used humor to kind of reduce the tension there. And you made a self-deprecating joke about yourself. And I'm sure at once, you know, all that sense of resistance went down because you were willing to laugh at yourself, right? So so these cultural things we can use to our advantage, even if we are surprised when we run into a block. Pellegrino, you spent 24 years in Norway, I understand.
I have, yeah.
Born to Italian parents in the UK, you went to school there, and then you went to Norway. You have so many influencers working in your life. How did you find that Italian influence interacting with the Norwegian culture? You probably have a few stories. Can you give us an example or two?
Well, you would think that just traveling from the UK to Norway, which is a very short journey across the North Sea, there wouldn't be that many challenges. I was initially quite shocked how different Norwegians were, not only to the Italian culture, but to the British as well. And the first thing, especially with regard to audiences, was that when I gave my first talks in Norway, what I saw, my perception of audience response, was that they said and did nothing. That was the word I used with myself, nothing. I got no reaction from them. Why? Well, because I was used to the kind of a lot of polite nodding, body language from Italians especially, which is much more demonstrative. You kind of know pretty much whether the typical Italian is enjoying your talk or not. They're not very good at hiding their feelings. And then you come to Norway, and I just saw a bank of screensavers. So I just couldn't read their body language, and I would go home in the evening and tell my wife, oh, it was terrible, they hate me. And it was only later when I asked the locals, listen, am I doing something wrong? And they said, no, you're great, we love it. What's with the screensavers? I said, well, no, this is the way in Scandinavia. We listen attentively, we're very kind of balanced, grounded, and their facial expressions were there, but they weren't as demonstrative. I was tuned in for bigger signals. I was getting smaller signals. And it took me a while to get used to that. Now I can see the signals, but it did take me a while to read them. So yeah, that was interesting, absolutely. But what I learned from that is this kind of credo that I have all the time, is that behind any behavior, there's usually a positive intention. Behind every behavior, there's usually a positive intention. So they weren't disinterested. Notice the negative word there. They weren't disinterested at all. They were being attentive. Yes. They were listening. They were being respectful. And I think that's really difficult to remember sometimes in a situation where you're speaking to an audience, that they're not there to put you down. They're not there to dismiss you. They're not there to make you feel bad. Any behavior you see, well, there will be a positive intention behind it. I don't know if you agree with that, Sandra, whether you've had experience with that.
I have, and thank you for that. It is true. My belief is, and I'll say it this way, my belief is that if I walk into a room, if I'm there to give for good, that it's going to be received. That's just my belief. And so people receive from, I love speaking from my heart. And so people can receive that, and they typically do. You know, I don't know whether it's telepathic, maybe it's the brain, I have no idea, but people can receive that I'm there to support, to be open, be vulnerable, throw in humor if I need to or want to, but to be relaxed and to make this a supportive environment. And that's a lot of what Toastmasters has taught me as well.
Sandra, you said something, you said it modestly, but what you said is a great truth in communication. Most of our listeners today are communicators and leaders. What you store in your heart, it is what spills out from your mouth. That's actually in Luke 6:45 in the Bible, okay? What you store in your heart spills out. When you store in your heart a love and a respect for the people you are communicating with, even if they're from other cultures, your body language, your facial expressions, your eyes communicate that. And it makes them ready to receive what you're saying. So no wonder you have excelled in a very sensitive post that you work at every day, but it comes through, and I can feel it as you talk. So here's a question about something that Pellegrino referred to, and you didn't use the words. The technical words are uncertainty avoidance. That is in different cultures, their ability to deal with that which is vague and ambiguous varies. Some cultures can handle it, they just roll with it. And some cultures, everything has to be specific, defined, clear boundaries. Otherwise, they're uncomfortable. And this comes across when you speak with people, especially because I was a teacher in college for many years. I noticed some students are not comfortable with being invited to participate in the discussion because they think the professor should know everything. Right? The professor is trying to get them to think. The way I was brought up in Sri Lanka was you just sit down, shut up, listen to the professor, take notes, and then regurgitate that at the exam, which I found I did not enjoy. And it was only when I came to the United States, I loved being called upon to interact and engage with the professor. Have you seen these, Pellegrino, in your, this dealing with the ambiguous and the uncertainty avoidance?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, as a general rule, again, when I'm working in European cultures, especially the Nordic and English-speaking ones, it's really simple to get this kind of teacher-student, if I may use that word, interaction going. One is expected to have an opinion, basically. When I'm running the same cultural awareness courses, the last one I did was I was in Vietnam, for example. I was much less inviting direct participation from people. But what I did instead, I just organized a lot more group work, 3-4 people in a group, allow the group to nominate their spokesperson. Let them do that. They know which one. Because it could vary. It could be the best who's English. It could be the elder one, the senior one. You don't know those dynamics. Let them sort that out. And I would ask the spokesperson from the group after 10 minutes to give feedback. And then we would have feedback from the various groups. It's a bit more managed and less chaotic, because what you mentioned about uncertainty avoidance, the higher the uncertainty avoidance, the more structure and limitation they want. So that's why group work works better. It's much more controlled. Do you see that? Yeah.
That's brilliant.
In the lower uncertainty avoidance, UK, Scandinavia, you can just let it go. See which direction it goes. Yeah. So this is kind of low uncertainty avoidance. You have your questions, but you don't really know what we're going to say, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
So that's what I found helps a lot. But again, you're listening and trying to keep in tune with the audience all the time, because that's your expectation, but it may not be right. You've got to stay in tune all the time. Not all cultures fall into their pattern, the expected pattern. So you're always kind of, the antenna are up to see what works and what doesn't. And again, you will make mistakes.
Yes, it's okay, as long as we learn from them, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm going to ask Sandra, but based on what Pellegrino was saying, in Toastmasters, and you're a long-time Toastmaster district director and so forth, we have a part of the program, it's called Table Topics, where you do impromptu speaking. That means you did not have a chance to think about what you're planning to say. You are called upon, given the topic, bang, and go for it, which is very unstructured. And I would think that for some, it's not just even the culture, it's the personality. Some people just want time to think, and other people can just begin talking, and while they're talking, they can make it up. Right. So here we see the intermixing of culture with the personality style, right? Culture and personality style. And so in order for us to know our audience and connect with them, we have to be informed about them as a person too. Just because someone belongs to a certain ethnic group does not mean that everybody in that ethnic group will behave exactly the same way, right? Right. So Sandra, could you address that, how you have seen this play out and what you find helpful in case someone asks you, well, okay, I understand the culture, but then there are so many different personalities within that culture. How do I best adopt a communication approach that works?
Thank you so much for that question. I think one of the things is it's about relationship, and it's about getting to know the person who is in front of you, who you're listening to. You can context them as well, because, you know, I've met people from the same country, but the way in which they each communicate is individual. And I must, in order to work with them, know who they are and what their needs are. So again, that's where I start, is knowing who they are and what their needs are. That's vital. And then I'm listening. I'm a listener, and so I'll listen to what they say. I get clues from the words that are spoken, and then I can go in and dig deeper if I need to. It's just one of those ways that within Toastmasters, one has been able to acquire that skill. I have to attribute a lot of this communication back and forth and listening skills to the organization itself. Being in it for so long, but also wanting to be not only a practitioner of good communication. I'm striving to be an artist at it. And that's the thing that keeps me working on the relationship building with each individual that I get to know and work with.
Wonderful, wonderful. So as our time is drawing close to an end, I'll just throw this out to both of you to think of some examples you can give about listening with an open mind to facilitate better communication across cultures. What are some tips and cues that you can give to our audience? Because sometimes we hear something and the tendency we have is we want to categorize what we are hearing, and then we want to understand it from our own lens instead of wondering what they are looking at, what their lens is. So I find myself trying to zip my mouth when I'm listening to someone and I'm disagreeing, because my normal tendency is to think, oh, there's something wrong with the way they're thinking. But instead, zip my mouth and listen to get cues as to what their context is. Right? What are some things that you found to help you become a better listener?
If I can.
Yeah, Sandra, please.
Go ahead.
The first thing that I do and always do is the basic, and that's never make an assumption. I never make an assumption. If I have to go and ask an open-ended question or to do a little probing, that's one of the things that I found. I one time saw an encounter in which someone had an accent, and the listener, I was overhearing this, assumed that they were from a particular country, and it didn't go well. So I stepped in as I was called in and had the kind of calm things down. And then later on to the person, I said, never make an assumption. What I typically do is just ask, what Caribbean island are you from? And that way you'll get the response. Don't ever assume. And that way you'll be respectful, because the Caribbean accents can sound very, very similar, but don't make an assumption that it's one particular island.
Wow, thank you. Pellegrino, you had something to add.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to something that was said earlier about the word respect. Everyone uses the word respect nowadays. I'm educated as a linguist originally, and I'm a great fan of etymology, looking at where words come from, which often give you an idea of what they really mean. And respect is the combination of re and spect. Re meaning again, and spect meaning to look. Mm. And respect in a linguistic way actually means to look at someone again. You're looking at them from a new angle. You're willing to take a new perspective at them. And it kind of ties in with your comment, Sandra, about not making assumptions. Because you will have assumptions, that's normal. The brain has to make assumptions. That's how it works. And it will usually make negative assumptions as well, which is unhelpful. But respect means look again, ask questions, ask why. You know, I just simply want to know where people are from in terms of their story. tell me about yourself. They mention a country. Usually I've been to the country, which is a good start. Oh, I was there in 2016 and I were, oh, were you? You're off. But you're there to look at them from a new angle. You're kind of seeing different perspectives. That's what respect really means for me. And that's helped me become a better listener, really. I just want to hear the stories. That's it.
Wow, thank you. Pellegrino and Sandra, you've been awesome. I have learned so much from you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience with us and with this worldwide audience. And now I return control to Angela Cunningham.
Panelists, thank you so much. What a great discussion. And thanks for sharing your thoughts and insights. We have 15 minutes left. This is the part of the webinar that I do want to throw open to Q&A. Now, we've had some amazing questions come in through from our attendees. Dilip, I'm actually going to start with you, if I may. I have a question here from Paul, who asks, how important is it to make an effort to speak at least just a few words in the language of others?
I'd say that's a great way to break the ice. If someone has taken the effort to learn a few words and then learn how to say those words and say them, for me, that's a mark of, going to what Pellegrino said, a mark of respect and recognition that you are worth my time. I want to do this because you are important to me. Yes, I think that's a wonderful way to break the ice. When I went to Mexico on a presidential visit, before I went, I learned a little of the language so that I could speak a few words. Hello, how are you? Greetings, thank you, all those words. And I found that they really appreciated it. And I felt the same way when someone sees me and they say, Ayubowan, which is the Sinhalese traditional greeting. And I feel like, wow, this person is a citizen of the world and I'm part of his sphere. Yes, that's a great way to connect.
Thanks, Dilip. I have a question here from Avashi for Sandra. Sandra, Avashi says, I am an international student. How can I make someone open up in a class full of different nationalities and cultures?
One is to get to know the styles of the cultures themselves. That's important because of the fact that we typically work from our own context. We communicate from our own context. When we want to learn how to communicate better to others, we have to know what their context is. And that takes a little bit of research. But in this day and age, research isn't hard. We can Google it to find out a little bit more. And if you can get an understanding of the different cultures, one, it opens your world up, your context grows, and then people will, you can listen better and they can respond better and you can understand each other just a little bit better. So get to know the audience, get to know all of the members of the audience. It may take a little time, but it's worth the investment.
One thing I did, I was running a short course at a local business school, which is full of international students. As a kind of icebreaker, I just did a quick Kahoot quiz of all the different nationalities in the room to see how much they knew about each other's nationalities. It's really simple. You know, you Google the answers and just get them to engage with each other on that level. And that was enough to kind of break the ice between them. And we had some good laughs about how much and how little they knew about each other, right? That was a really easy way to do it. That worked quite well. It doesn't take that long to prepare.
I hope that answers your question, Avashi. Thank you very much for your posing that on the Q&A panel here. Pellegrino, just sticking with you, if I may, a question from you, Geeta. How do we establish some commonality in an online environment, such as the one we're in today?
Well, it sounds simple, but it really is just looking for the common things in people. And what kind of things do I talk about with people that everybody has? Well, it's families, it's the weather, Again, asking questions, how are you today? And listening to the answer and picking up one of the words in the answer and following up the word. I've just come back from holiday. Holiday, where were you? I was in, oh, that's a cool place. Tell me what you saw. You know, it's back to the listening again. But although I work in the area of cultural differences and bridging gaps, we must never forget about the commonalities. People around the world want health, education, safety, security, you know, good families and good mental health. You know, it's the same things. Those are the things I talk about. And I'm a believer that you can talk about anything as long as you ask with genuine curiosity. Anything goes.
Thanks, Pellegrino. Thank you for that. Dilip, Ping Ping asks, we don't always have a lot of information about our audience. How would you suggest to prepare a speech when you don't really know your audience?
Well, when I prepare a speech, I want to know about my audience. As a professional speaker, I send a questionnaire to the person who is organizing the talk. And I ask questions about the audience, things like, here's some examples. I'll ask, what is this audience most proud about? What are they most sorry about? Are there any topics I should avoid bringing up? Please give me the names of 3 movers and shakers so that I can telephone them and have discussions with them in order to prepare me for my presentation. A good presenter does not take the audience for granted, but does the work that is required to understand them as well as possible. For example, there was a company that invited me to give a keynote speech. It was an important event in the company, but I wrote and asked what the mission and vision of that company was to send me the website. I studied that and I did have a conversation with one of the senior managers. When I finished my talk, one of those senior managers came to me and said, you know the mission and vision of our company better than most of our employees. Because I was, as Pellegrino said, you find what is important to them. And then you incorporate that into your talk, then they say, oh, this person really cares about us, and it's not about him, it's about us, and he's giving us a gift of that awareness, right?
Could I add one more thing, actually, Dilip, just to interrupt? I asked the client, if you had a magic wand and could give them something at the end of my talk that they didn't have before, what would that be?
Yeah.
What feeling, what is it you would like them to have?
That's right. I framed that in a question called, what would delight your audience? Yeah.
Great.
So ask questions. Sandra, you were saying this too. Ask questions and then listen. Right. That's important. That's so important before the speaker begins the speech.
Panel, I think we have time for one more question. I'm going to throw it out there. Sandra, if you'd like to start and kick us off, and Dilip and Pellegrino, please feel free to chime in. We are at about 3 minutes to go. A question here from Mita, Sandra. Any ideas on how to approach and overcome complete communication breakdown, i.e. 2 parties not speaking to each other?
That could be for a number of reasons. And so determine what the reasons are. Is it culture? Or is it something else? Has there been a disagreement? Again, I go back to that quick encounter that I had the interface of. It wasn't going to turn out well until I had to interact, and then giving a hint to one, and then calming down the other. So finding out what the disagreement was. I happened to have overheard it and could step in pretty quickly. But determining if there are 2 people apart from yourself, if you know what the disagreement is, address it. If you don't know what the disagreement is, you've got to find out.
Pellegrino, Dilip.
And if I may add, when 2 people talk, and if one person feels disrespected, then in that person's mind, it's no longer about the issue at hand, it's about the lack of respect shown to them. Suddenly it changes. So unless that is addressed, there's no sense in keeping on talking about the issue because one person has just shut his mind. You follow what I'm saying? So that respect is so important because it opens up the floodgates for communication. And if that has been the problem, then address it and open that up again in order to move forward.
Pellegrino, any final words on that?
Basically what Dilip said there, you know, conflict and shutdown is because people feel that some emotion, feeling, or idea has not been acknowledged or validated, right? So you need to validate that, acknowledge it by simply asking why type questions. What is it that is bothering you the most? And that normally opens people up. You've got to acknowledge the emotion behind the action. Without doing that, as Dilip says, you get this shutdown. They're unable to listen or speak.
Very much. Well, panelists and attendees, we are actually at time. So thank you so much, Dilip, Pellegrino.
Pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for spending time with us today. We truly appreciate all your insights. I'm sure our audience were able to collect some good insights from your information there. Thank you all for joining us too. We will be sending a recording of this webinar out very soon, and please do feel free to send it to anyone you think who would benefit from the insights we had today. Until next time, thank you. Goodbye.